Welcome back, everyone. It's another edition of the Live Ones College Football Preview, and this week we're tackling a conference that has spent the last 2 years making a big loud noise and saying, "Hey, look over here!" And in the midst of all the crazy realignment and consolidation, the Sun Belt actually jumped the line and is welcoming 4 new faces this year. We've got Marshall, Old Dominion, and Southern Miss coming in from Conference USA, and FCS perennial powerhouse James Madison is coming in to make this a 14-team conference. And with all the new faces, things are going to be shuffled around. The big 3 that have dominated this conference the last couple of years, App State, Coastal Carolina, and Louisiana, they're going to have unfamiliar opponents to contend with. Is that going to mean an upending of the more recent pecking order? Well, let's take a deep dive into each team, and we'll find out. And we're going to start with Appalachian State. They had another great year last year, going 10-2 in the regular season. They beat East Carolina, had a thriller of a Week 2 contest against Miami where they almost pulled it out, then ran the conference with the exception of Louisiana. They got into the conference title game, lost to Louisiana again, and got blown the hell out by Western Kentucky in the Boca Raton Bowl. They lost their best linebacker, DeMarco Jackson, to the draft, and 5 of the other top 7 tacklers on defense to graduation. The team's going to need to lean on the offense, and that's just fine. Chase Bryce came into his own at quarterback last year. We saw the quarterback Clemson always wished he could be. 3,300 yards, 27 touchdowns, 11 picks. He did lose his top 3 receivers, which is bad, but none of his top 3 receivers had over 1,000 yards because this is a system that's designed to spread the ball around as much as possible. There's a plethora of running backs and a plethora of new receivers coming up the pike. No one's a star. This has become Sean Clark's MO. Always work the pipeline of recruitment and talent, and really, it helps when you're viewed as a program on the rise. You know, in college football, success begets more success, failure begets more failure, and it's really tough to, it's always tough to kind of like turn your fortunes around like that. You have to have, for recruiting purposes, you have to have the perception that you're a school that's going to, either going to have great things happen to them or is right on the cusp of having great things happen to them. The same is true on defense. This team's had 10 key players come in through the transfer portal since the end of last season from places like Arkansas, Oklahoma, SMU, Wake Forest, Notre Dame, North Carolina, Wisconsin. On stability and recruitment alone, I think this team's going to be just fine again on both sides of the ball. The problem is that their schedule is a killer. This program's become the prettiest girl at the dance. All the elite Power 5 programs won a game against them. They open up against North Carolina and on the road against Texas A&M. Those are probably both losses, but, you never know with North Carolina. You never know if they're going to actually be good or not year to year. Road games against Coastal Carolina and Marshall are 50-50 toss-ups. This team might actually take a step backwards and be a 9-3 team this year, but that road game on November 3rd against Coastal Carolina will likely wind up being a play-in game for the conference championship. Arkansas State, probably the most disappointing team in the conference last year. They just had no defense to speak of. 124th ranked defense in the country, almost dead last. Their offense was better, but only by a little bit. Butch Jones is in full rebuild mode, and it all starts with that defense. Dead last in the country against the run. The lone bright spot was senior edge rusher Kevon Bennett. 58 tackles, 7 sacks, and 15.5 tackles for loss with 2 forced fumbles in 2021. The problem was he was the only good thing on that defense last year, and everyone knew it, so he got double-teamed a lot, kind of kept his stats down. James Blackman got the starting quarterback job this year. His stats from last year weren't great, but it's largely due to the limited field time he had. When he was on, he actually was on. He's going to need to take a big step up and make use of the veteran wide receiver core. This team really can only be improved over last year. There's just nowhere else for them to go. Grambling State at Old Dominion, ULM, James Madison at Southern Miss, South Alabama, UMass at Texas State, Troy. There are a lot of games in that bunch that even a bad team can win, so split them. 4-8. That's a good benchmark, and it would be an improvement over last year. Coastal Carolina. Another awesome freaking year for this team that has done nothing but good things since its inception. 11-2, and those 2 losses came by a grand total of 5 points. But, man, this team lost a lot of talent. Just about every key player from last year's defense is gone. It is gutted. Fortunately, they are getting back Grayson McCall at quarterback. Despite missing 2 games to injury, the stellar quarterback completed 73% of his passes for an awesome 12 yards a clip on average, 27 touchdowns against only 3 picks. This was one of the most efficient offenses in the country on third down, and when McCall got too much of the attention, he could always just hand it off to junior Shamari Jones, the 1,000-yard rusher who notched 13 touchdowns. This was the 5th-ranked offense in the entire country last year, number 5. With all those crazy sugar rush offenses in the Big 12 and the MAC, to stand head and shoulders above them all, I think they're going to be fine having to carry the load while the defense rebuilds. Schedule-wise, this team's for real, and they're not going to surprise anyone anymore. Their out-of-conference games include a home game against Army that they should win in a shootout, and a road game against Virginia that's going to be a really, really tough one. The Appalachian State game is at home. There's no Louisiana to face, and there should be a built-in 6 wins to at least make bowl eligibility all but a sure thing. But the Marshall game on the road is going to be tough. Getting back to 10 wins again, a 3rd straight year, is really going to be tough. It's always tough no matter who you are, no matter what conference you play in. 9-3 would still certainly be very respectable. Like we said with App State, the game between those two teams on November 3rd is likely going to determine who wins the East, I would say. Although, you never know. Marshall might be in the mix, maybe even Georgia State. We'll see. Georgia Southern. After 3 straight winning seasons, 2021 was definitely a clunker of a year that saw Chad Lunsford get shown the door. But they did manage to get themselves a great hire in former USC head coach Clay Helton, who has a Pac-12 title, a Rose Bowl, and a fantastic reputation to his name. If this guy can't turn around the Eagles' fortunes, no one can. The problem is there's going to be a transition. The Eagles are going to be moving from the triple option that they're used to running in favor of the spread offense that Helton is known for. And there are major questions about who's going to be the quarterback to run it. The hope is for grad transfer Kyle Vantrease from Buffalo to serve as a 1-year stopgap. Vantrease never really set the scoreboard on fire at Buffalo. His credentials are really just that he has a whole lot of experience. The offense was terrible last year, barely eking out 20 points a game. This team only had 5 passing touchdowns all 12 games last year, just 5 passing touchdowns. It had the benefit of a lot of returning starters who should theoretically be better with experience, but it's a big uphill road to climb. The defense was atrocious against the run. They just got pushed around by almost every offensive line they faced, especially at the tackle position. They just don't have the size up the middle, and it's not getting any better this year. Schedule-wise, they have some games that they should win by accident. The opener against Morgan State will be where we see if Helton's new system can click right away. They get the benefit of former FCS team James Madison being on their schedule now. Old Dominion's a winnable game, and South Alabama should be a win at home, but that's it. 4-8 is the best I think this team can do until Helton starts improving the recruiting. Georgia State, a very pleasantly surprising 8-5 last year, including handing Coastal Carolina one of their only 2 losses. This team got red hot on offense once they hit conference play with a killer duo of running backs who combined for 1,900 yards and 18 touchdowns, and a dual threat quarterback who notched 22 combined passing and rushing touchdowns against only 4 picks. And all 3 of them are back. Let's start with Darren Granger. Go back and watch the highlights from his game against Auburn. Anytime a Sun Belt quarterback rips off for all those rushing yards against an SEC defense, you know you're dealing with someone who is slippery, elusive, and most importantly, cool, calm, and collected under pressure. The senior running backs are going to thrive. Tucker Gregg is a reliable 220-pound occasional workhorse who averaged close to 5 yards per carry on his 953 yards. Fellow senior Jameis Williams is a quick back who transferred over from South Carolina and ran for almost 7 yards a clip with 9 scores. The defense isn't great up front, but it definitely has the talent in the back 7. Antavius Lane helms the secondary. He's a 2-time All-Sun Belt performer with 136 tackles, 9 interceptions, 12 broken-up passes, 2 forced fumbles, and 4 tackles for loss in his last 2 seasons. 2 of those interceptions he actually ran back for pick sixes. Looking at the schedule, this team unfortunately is in for a meat grinder as the conference just keeps getting better and more talented. At South Carolina, home against North Carolina, home against Coastal Carolina, at Army, at App State, at Marshall. Realistically, the best they can hope for is to split those games 50-50. They get some easy ones as well, though. They do get Charlotte as one of their out-of-conference games. They get Old Dominion, ULM, and at James Madison. Should all be wins. This team's got the potential to get to 8 wins again. Probably 7 is more likely. I would say 7-5. James Madison, the perennial FCS powerhouse, getting an upgrade to the big time. And if anything, there's no pressure on them. There's no expectations of success right away. And it's a good thing because this team lost a lot of talent from last year, and there are serious question marks at a lot of positions. Quarterback Cole Johnson was the CAA Offensive Player of the Year, and now he needs to be replaced. And star receiver Antwain Wells is off to South Carolina. They're looking to slot in Colorado State transfer Todd Centeio, who was okay against Mountain West teams last year. He notched almost 3,000 yards, but he wasn't as accurate as you'd like from a starter with as much experience as he has. Fortunately, he'll have some help from an experienced offensive line and a great every-down running back in Latrell Palmer. Defense is where they're losing the most talent and where the transition is going to be the toughest. There are a lot of new faces coming in through the transfer portal, but how well they're going to work together is a giant question mark. So just how much noise can the Dukes make right away? Well, Middle Tennessee is beatable. They're beatable by anybody. Norfolk State is a sure win. Texas State should be a win. And Old Dominion is at least a toss-up. This is a really, really great program by FCS standards. They've absolutely dominated those ranks, and they should be ready for a step up in competition. 4-8, or 5-7 their first year out of the gate should not be out of the question. Louisiana. It was one of the worst kept secrets in college football that Billy Napier was just killing time at Louisiana before going off to become a giant head coach somewhere like Florida. Now Louisiana has to try to maintain its greatness and keep on winning without Napier, without quarterback Levi Lewis, and without a slew of really good parts who took off for Gainesville with their former head coach. We're going to have an interesting preview of Florida once we get to the SEC. The offense is going to have to be in full rebuild mode, but that's okay because the defense was an absolute monster last year. 11th in the country overall, and one of the absolute best in the country in generating turnovers. 22 takeaways to 4 giveaways. You're going to win most games with that dominating a unit no matter how good your offense is. The big star is 6th-year defensive tackle and 3-time second-team All-Sun Belt Zeon Hill. He's an anchor, but he can also get into the backfield with 13 sacks, 19.5 tackles for loss, 6 fumble recoveries, and 299 tackles in his 5 years of work. Cornerback Eric Garrer holds things down in the secondary, 103 career tackles, 1 sack, 6 interceptions, 19 broken up passes in 4 seasons. With this defense, I'd give them a fighting chance against any team in the Sun Belt that's not Coastal Carolina. Unfortunately, they don't play Coastal Carolina. All of their out-of-conference games are winnable, including the Week 13 match against Florida State. That's more a knock on Florida State than anything, but it's true. There's no reason this team shouldn't run away with the West again and be in the Sun Belt Championship game. Marshall. This school, man, they are becoming a hobo. They hopped from the FCS to the MAC to Conference USA and now getting poached by the Sun Belt. They had an average 2021 at best with a feast or famine quarterback who subsequently left for Virginia Tech because inconsistent defense and a rookie head coach that struggled to find his footing from time to time. Fortunately, they also had some really bright spots, and chief among them was all-conference running back Rasheen Ali, who just pulverized opposing defenses for 1,400 yards and 23 rushing scores, with 45 catches out of the backfield on top of it. This guy, keep an eye on him. He's going to be a 4th or 5th round NFL draft pick someday. The defensive style was bend but don't break. They gave up a ton of yards, but they were pretty good at keeping opponents to field goals instead of touchdowns. The defense is helmed by senior linebacker Abraham Beauplan, who pretty much lived in the backfield last year. They also return a duo of great corners in Stephen Gilmore and Micah Abraham, who've combined for over 230 tackles and 8 interceptions in their careers. Schedule-wise, man, oh man, this team caught a massive break in its first year in the Sun Belt. Louisiana, App State, Georgia State, Coastal Carolina, the 4 toughest teams in the conference. They got to face them all, but they're all home games. If Marshall can win even 2 of them, they're going to be in great shape, especially if one of them is Louisiana. Norfolk State, Gardner-Webb, at Bowling Green, 3 almost certain wins. Troy should be a win. Old Dominion should be a win. You might be looking at an 8-4 team this year. They should certainly be improved over last year. It's been an interesting ride for Old Dominion football since joining FBS back in 2013. It closed out its 8-4 first season in 2013, again, playing mostly FCS teams. They gave up 80 points to North Carolina. They went bowling with a great 10-win season in 2016, and then they spiraled downward from there over 3 years before missing all of 2020. They just flat out said, we're not fielding a football team in 2020. And now, after 8 years in Conference USA, it's taking off for the Sun Belt. And unfortunately, it's not in great shape in terms of its depth. At quarterback, it's an interesting situation. You got sophomore Hayden Wolf, who appears to be the center of attack. He hit 63% of his passes last year for close to 2,000 yards and 10 touchdowns, with 7 more touchdowns rushing. But they also used backup DJ Mack on about a third of the drives. He had 6 passing touchdowns to go along with 856 passing yards and 5 scores. It seems to work for them. Leading rusher Blake Watson is back after taking off for 1,100 yards and 8 scores last year. The offense should be in decent shape. The defense, it just needs more playmakers. wasn't awful. I mean, it was mid-tier in terms of, national. I call sophomore Amory Morrison the player to watch on the line. He made 33 tackles in his freshman year with 5 quarterback pressures, 3.5 sacks, and 5 tackles for loss. He's got the quickness and upside to become a force now that he's getting more experienced in the gig. Schedule-wise, this school is going to be another victim of moving to this much more powerful conference. Virginia Tech at home, at East Carolina. That actually might be a 50-50 game. At Virginia, loss. Arkansas State, toss-up. Liberty, loss. And then it gets really, really brutal. At Coastal Carolina, home against Georgia Southern, on the road against Georgia State, at home against Marshall. They might lose all 4 of those games. James Madison, toss-up. App State, loss. South Alabama could go either way. 4-8 is the best I think this team can do. I think 3-9 is probably more likely. South Alabama did a whole lot better than expected. It's tough to say that of a 5-7 team, but they did catch Georgia Southern and Arkansas State in unusual clunker years. This program hasn't had a winning season since getting up to the big level in the Sun Belt in 2012, so almost going bowl eligible there counts for something. Head coach Kane Womack, however, has done some really impressive work through the transfer portal. He's brought in 15 3-star recruits just in the last year. And among the ones who are going to be eligible this year, former Toledo quarterback Carter Bradley to compete with Desmond Trotter for the starting job. He's got 4 years of playing experience, throwing for just under 2,400 yards with 14 touchdowns and 8 picks. The passing attack is going to take a little bit of a hit with Jalen Tolbert, now a Dallas Cowboy. But Jalen Wayne in the slot and Colin Lacey as the deep threat are both back. Those two combined for over 900 yards last year, but should get a lot more looks this year. Where this team suffers is for lack of a consistent running game to set up the pass. Senior Terrion Avery is the feature back, and he's 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Constantly. He's got to get better, as does the offensive line and run blocking for him. On defense, the Jaguars are, actually not that bad. They get back 8 starters and some major help from transfers like Nathan Rollins-Kibange from Oklahoma and James Miller and C.J. Pearson from Indiana. This team should be able to get production from everywhere on the defensive side of the ball that should keep them in most games. The Jaguars play in the West, which means they get to avoid 4 of the 5 toughest teams in the conference. No App State, Coastal Carolina, Georgia State, or Marshall. They get to play Nichols, ULM, Texas State, and Old Dominion at home, so that gives you a base of 4 wins. They need to go 2-6 in the other 8 to make it to a bowl. It's very doable. I think this could be a 6-6 team. Southern Miss shit the bed last year, but then started to clean it up at the end of the season. The offense couldn't move the ball, the defense couldn't carry the whole load, and it got ugly. I mean, this team did not score 20 points against an FBS program until November 19th. Honestly, the problem was the offensive line. The offense was dead last in the nation in tackles for loss allowed and dead last in turnovers. I mean, that's just, your offensive line may as well not be there. Your quarterback has no protection. You're not going to get the offense going. It really doesn't matter who you put back there if you don't have blocking up front. For what it's worth, Frank Gore Jr. did run for 801 yards and 5 touchdowns last year. It's crazy. Frank Gore just retired last year. And he's got a son who's playing college football. Frank Gore's career lasted a long-ass time. And Mississippi State transfer Janari Dean is pushing his way into playing time in a rotation with second leading rusher Dejan Ricard. Jason Brownlee has 8 touchdowns and has become the team's number 1 receiver. It's not like they don't have some talent. The defense is helmed by junior linebacker and second-team all-conference Hayes Maples. Over the last 3 years, he amassed 182 tackles, 3 sacks, 14 tackles for loss, and forced 3 fumbles. This team's real strength of depth is in its secondary, and it showed last year. Despite everything that went wrong for them, this was the top passing defense in Conference USA. That should carry through this year as they're returning a whole lot of starters. Schedule-wise, this team can't possibly be as bad as it was last year. The defense should keep the Golden Eagles in every game, but going to Miami is going to be a problem, and traveling to Coastal Carolina should be a loss. Other than that, everything depends on the offense. If they can get moving, this is a 6-6 team. The Texas State Bobcats, they're showing improvement, believe it or not. Jake Spivall is building up a team through the transfer portal rather than even trying to compete with the likes of the much bigger, wealthier programs in Texas. The 4 wins last year really did mark a step forward, and the talent that's returning is experienced. But if they're going to run the air raid, they need a quarterback, and it's an open competition between 3 transfers right now. The job is Lane Hatcher's to use, in my opinion. The transfer from Arkansas State has a ton of experience. He threw for almost 7,500 yards and 65 touchdowns with 25 picks in his 3 seasons, and he ran for 2 scores. He's got the big arm to stretch the field. DeMarcus Gregory from USF is joining a loaded receiver core that should give whoever wins the job a ton of targets to throw to. The defense was the worst in the Sun Belt at generating sacks and pressure. It allowed 430 yards and 33 points a game, and it was mostly awful against the run. That just has to improve. Hopefully some of the incoming transfers can help with that, but there's no one in particular to point to and say, that's going to be the standout. Looking at the schedule, they've got 4 sure losses baked in: App State, Louisiana, Baylor, and Nevada. FIU's a win. Houston Baptist is a win. That leaves on the road at James Madison, Southern Miss, at ULM, at South Alabama, Arkansas State, and at Troy. They'd have to win 4 of those 6 to be bowl eligible. I just don't think that's possible. But splitting them, going 3-3, and going 5-7 for the season, another step forward, I think that's your ceiling. Troy won 5 games last year, like they seem to do every damn year under Chip Lindsey, hence his being shown the door. The successor to Neil Brown, he was not. The team, when not being coached by Brown, always just seems to be the class of the lower tier teams in this conference. They're just there every year. You don't even notice them. They're instantly forgettable. Maybe that'll change under John Summerall. He certainly knows the program well. He was an assistant there for years. It's been made clear that expectations are that he will get this team bowl eligible again. Can he do it? Well, it's going to have to be on the strength of the defense because the starting quarterback and the best wide receiver from last year are gone, and there's not a lot of great options at either position. The running backs are there. Kamani Vidal led the team with 696 yards and 5 touchdowns. And Jamontez Woods is a good back around the goal line, averaging over 5 yards a carry, with a team-high 6 touchdowns. On defense, the new regime basically has to let them do what they did last year, generate a massive amount of pass rush, and let the turnovers come. Carlton Marshall will be the star of that side of the ball, a 4-time first-team All-Sun Belt linebacker. His career has amassed an insane 442 tackles with 10 sacks, 47 tackles for loss, 5 interceptions, 12 broken up passes, 7 forced fumbles, and 2 fumble recoveries. If this guy were to put on about 25 pounds of muscle, he'd be a surefire 4th or 5th round NFL draft pick. This is a tough group to forecast with the new regime in place, but with a conference like the Sun Belt, having a defense as good as Troy's does will make most games a toss-up. But eventually you have to score points to win games. I think they can beat Alabama A&M, Texas State, ULM for sure, so that's 3 wins. Ole Miss, App State, Louisiana, and Western Kentucky are probably losses. They'd have to go 3-2 in their remaining games to go 6-6. It's a coin flip for me. 5-7 again or 6-6. That's Troy. And finally, no one was expecting ULM to be any good after a winless 2020, and then that game at Liberty happened. They went into Liberty and stunned them on the road. And then they started off the season 4-3, and everybody said, what the heck is going on? And then they reverted to form and lost 5 straight to end the year. They're returning virtually everyone of note from last year, including quarterback Chandler Rogers, who threw 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns out of a platoon of backs. The starter's job should be his right now. He'll be helped out by probably the best player on the team overall, certainly one with the coolest name, senior wideout Boogie Knight. Boogie Knight. That is such an awesome name. The former Akron Zip wide receiver stepped in and became an all-Sun Belt performer and the team's leading receiver, catching 45 passes for 588 yards and 3 touchdowns. He did that after making 41 grabs for 194 yards in 3 seasons at Akron. The defense was one of the worst in the country last year, giving up over 400 yards and 33 points a game. There aren't many bright spots to speak of on that side of the ball, but senior linebacker Zach Woodard was one of them. 89 tackles, 3.5 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, 1 interception, 3 broken up passes. The problem is he just doesn't have a whole lot of help anywhere else on the defensive side of the ball. The Warhawks' schedule is a meat grinder on the road against Alabama, on the road against Texas. Really, the only sure win they've got is against Nichols, the FCS school that they open up against. Texas State, Arkansas State, and and South Alabama are all 50-50 toss-ups. Assume to be generous that they'll win 2 out of those 3. 3-9 is the best I think this team can hope for, and there's just not the blocking up front on either side of the ball to really make a difference the right way. So there you have it, the Sun Belt. Chock full of fresh faces to shake things up. 5 solid programs up at the top who you could all conceivably make the championship game. I think it's Louisiana's to lose in the West. But Coastal Carolina, App State, and Marshall should all be in the thick of it in the East, and don't sleep on Georgia State if all the breaks go their way. Next up, we've got to cover them. We've got to cover them, maybe for the last time ever. But it's the conference that all these teams are leaving, the conference that desperately needs to find a new business model just to stay alive. We'll be covering what's left of Conference USA. See you next time.